CNBC-TV18, embarking on a quarter-century of excellence.
It is CNBC-TV18's 25th birthday, and we can't celebrate it with one person who has been a well-wisher all through these 25 years, and perhaps one of our first guests, Mr. KV Kamath, right now Chairman of NaBFID, Chairman of Geofinancial as well, and one of CNBC-TV18's earliest well-wishers. Mr. Kamath, thank you very much for joining us. I don't know if you remember, but you were the first guest whom I interviewed as the first entrant in CNBC-TV18.
I can only say time flies, all good wishes, and I'm sure the next 25 is going to come at rapid speed with even more excitement, and I'm sure CNBC-TV18 will continue to deliver great news, great value to all of us.
Thank you, sir. I hope you remember how we started off. You remember that slightly marshy place near Doordarshan and Worli.
Yes.
And you have even legged it over there because at that time we didn't have an OB van.
Yes.
We didn't have a satellite broadcast van.
I remember that, yes.
It's a long way since then. Now we are even able to remotely record interviews. Well, let me come to the Indian economy itself. We are talking about 1999 really, and now 2023. Our first shows were at that time. Where do you see this kind of clip that the economy has seen? The last number was 7.6. I mean, it was an amazing number. Does it look like we are now into a higher paradigm, or was that a one-off?
Actually, I was always expecting it to be around 7.5%. So it was honestly no surprise. Because that was our potential, and I'm happy that the potential was realized. And it has not happened by accident. There has been, I would say, a momentum that was building up and leading to this growth. The momentum is on several pillars. The momentum, of course, is there is a demand drive in the economy that's happening. Demand happens only when there's money in the people's hand, and there is aspiration. And you also need the people who meet that demand to have the capacity to meet that demand and to invest. And of course, for them to borrow if necessary. I think all these have fallen in place. And if you look at from the time of COVID, take a very quick snapshot. Twin balance sheets were cleaned up. So there was money in the hands of manufacturing companies, the bankers. Then clearly there has been growth in incomes of people. And aspirations were always there. So it is the right time that this happened. And I would think that this is just the start of the momentum, because you will now see the digital economy, the digital super cycle, as I used to call it some time back, start to kick in and overlay. It will be an overlay on that 7.5%. So let's see.
Okay.
Good news.
Well, I'm glad you touched on that, because I wanted to ask you, the recent Reserve Bank rules putting more risk weights on unsecured loans. Do you think that that might slow down, maybe correctly, but will it slow down lending? Because there was a fear in the Reserve Bank that some of the digital loans at least are being given perhaps without enough data.
I think we need to understand what is the impact of lending. If lending is a merry-go-round and it is basically washing debt that was there, I don't think it is good news. And the pace at which things were growing, as a banker, I would think, was giving a signal that maybe there's some need for caution. Then came the second issue, where we found that there probably were multiple loans that a borrower was taking. And thirdly, point that he's probably approaching other people for even more loans. It doesn't stop there. And to top it, the fact that look at the NIM margins, NIMs, that some of the NBFCs were having. At those NIMs, you need to have a bit of caution. So to me, there were cautionary signs, and the Reserve Bank has done well in tightening the requirements.
Now, you have forbidden me from asking about Geofinancial. I take your point that you are chairman and you're not CEO, and I should direct the questions to the CEO. But for the fintech sector as a whole, do you think this comes as a nasty jar?
No, it's not a nasty jar. It's a wake-up call. Okay. Because if you are doing certain things which clearly are not good systemically and for yourself, then the regulator clearly has to give a shout out to you. And that's what has happened. To me, it's a wake-up call.
Okay. How do you see the pace of economic growth? We did 7.6%, yes, but now there will be a couple of things. First of all, you will have consumption. As it is in that 7.6, consumption was not a very big piece. The bigger piece was really investment, and more of that coming from the government. But consumption could get a bit of a weight, a low down because of the higher risk weights. And plus you have, global interest rates also, which will start hurting global growth. So do you think we should be prepared for at least a year of more mellow growth?
Let me address the Indian situation, then global situation we can, because the global situation has been troubling for 3 years, so we have not really been impacted by that. The Indian situation, the first point is that the incremental lending that could have happened with lower risk weights, to me, was actually of no consequence, because it was not adding to growth. It was only recycling. That's my assessment. Somebody has to bear it out. But if the regulator has acted, and I would fully support the moves taken, then it is not adding to growth. So that's point number one. Point number two, in terms of components of growth, infrastructure, yes, and the government probably in our country for certain areas, government is the best party to invest. And now if the government can invest without drawdown from the budget,
yes,
what better situation can, you cannot be in a better situation. So, for example, if NHAI is putting out roads, and now they have what I call a perpetual financing engine through the InvIT structure. They have roads, they get matured, they are seasoned, their cash flow is good, you create an InvIT, and you invest in the next road. So that's the sort of growth that you would want in almost every area of business that is there. Then in manufacturing, there has been this point that investment is not happening, the private sector really investing. I think private sector invests very opportunistically. So if your capacity utilization is at 75% or 80%, and your implementation or lead time these days is 12 months, maximum 18 months, why would you invest in advance? And again, if one looks at and see, you have internal accruals to fund. So you don't see it reflected in bank borrowings, going for investment. I think we are in a good place. So investment is happening as appropriate, and probably more investment than we know probably is happening in the green area. Not only manufacturing companies turning green, but setting capacity for green. So there is, I think, investment happening in all the right areas. A large part of it is happening through their own books, as it were. And the rest of it will be from Indian system. The Indian system, the challenge is going to be finding longer term money.
Yes.
But it's a far change from, say, 25 years back. There was no long term money. Now you have pension money out there, you have insurance money out there, and there are other type of long term instruments and long term savers coming out there, and long term instruments coming out there. So to me, there's a virtuous cycle getting built there. We can finance these things. And to the extent necessary, if you want ultra long maturities, 20, 25, 30 years, I think companies are resorting to global borrowings. And those maturities are available out there.
Yes.
So I think it's going to be a nice hybrid model, domestic and global. Your second point on the global situation, I think we went through the COVID situation without managing our economy well and not getting any hit from the impact of things at the margin, things in the environment. The same thing happened with the situation in Europe. So I would now think that fear is a bit remote from my mind.
My fear was more that we are still running at a 5.9% fiscal deficit and states 3%. So almost a 9% fiscal deficit, which has to come down next year. And as you say, a large part of the infrastructure is being funded by the budget. There was a quantum leap in the kind of capex it did. If the fiscal deficit is brought down, won't that be a slowing down?
Yeah. My view is that what was being spent through the budget will increasingly be spent through the ability of these institutions which are doing these investments to generate on their own, in either by divestment of capital and reinvesting that, and running the thing on a fee basis. The whole thing runs on a fee basis, which then services the debt. And or private sector coming into other areas where the risk is more manageable.
Your word on the financial sector itself, what role actually do you see for fintechs?
Yeah, fintechs, I think, have changed the face of the BFSI sector. And the BFSI sector should acknowledge that to start with. And A, to acknowledge that, and B, carefully look at what is possible to do and implement that. So, for example, fintech can probably today set up a completely new app in 6 weeks. I think large banks need to question themselves as to how long will I take to do what they are doing. Is it going to be 1.5 years against 6 weeks that this kid is talking about? And then I think you'll have to recalibrate and reset your minds, because otherwise this free ride is not going to be there. The user
The
of
protective moat of the regulator will not last.
someday the regulator is going to run out of patience as far as the larger institutions are concerned. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think the opportunity is there, ready, and for these companies, BFSI companies, to change and reset themselves. I'm sure they'll take it.
Thank you very much. So that's a great optimistic note to end this conversation and to start 2024, that we are on the verge of at least 9% GDP growth, if not 10. Thank you very much for joining us on this very special day.
All good wishes on as you enter, finish this quarter century and move ahead.
CNBC-TV18, embarking on a quarter century of excellence.
Welcome back. To reiterate, we are stepping into our Silver Jubilee year, our 25th year, and we wanted to have the best of India Inc. with us. So joining me now is the Group CFO and Board Member at Larsen & Toubro, Mr. R. Shankararaman. Mr. Shankararaman, thank you very much indeed for joining us on our big day. We would like to think that we are lucky because the global and the Indian news is also brimming with positivity. Let me start with the GDP number, which surprised hugely on the positive. It's not just the 7.6% GDP number. It was largely because manufacturing was 13.9% and construction, something that you would be interested in, has grown at 13.3%. So let me start there. You gave us a very good guidance in terms of your revenue growth. Do you think it is going to be even better than that, given this macro performance?
Thank you, Latha, for having me. And let me start by wishing CNBC-TV18 and all of you my heartiest congratulations. Entering into the 25th year is a big milestone, and I think sustainability, staying relevant, etc., has contributed. So credit to all of you who are part of that brand to have made the brand so enduring and dear to the viewers. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, coming back to the question that you asked, I think it is no surprise that the construction contribution is picking up, because if you look at the orders that have got placed out over the last 2 years, ever since the government adopted the policy to be investment-led in terms of creating employment, making sure consumption demand revives on the back of that employment generation, it was but natural that with the lag of 1-2 years, construction will begin to pick up. Most of the projects that were awarded post-COVID are all in advanced stages of construction, and consequently, it is not surprising that their growth contribution is significant. We fortunately are in the thick of many of these important projects, and one of the reasons why during the discussions that we had post our half-yearly results was that we stuck our neck out and said that we are very likely to outperform our revenue projections that were put out as guidance at the beginning of the year. We had guided somewhere between 12 and 15%.
Yes.
And looking at the pace at which things were moving, we were reasonably confident that we could possibly exceed that guidance. By what order of magnitude could depend on so many other factors, because today, as we construct more and more, still clearances and approvals are part and parcel of that construction journey. Not everything is available to companies upfront for us to predict as to what kind of resources it has to deploy and how the revenues will map out. Now, for example, the poll in 4 states or 5 states actually put a temporary halt on some of the work that we were doing in those states. Now, we are also heading towards the national elections. So consequently, some interruptions are to be anticipated, which is what is making the whole job of predicting the exact percentage of growth over and above our guidance becomes tricky.
Okay.
We do believe that the year could go past because our assessment is the elections could be mostly in maybe April.
Yeah.
Around the time when schools shut and that infrastructure is available as polling booths, etc., could be the ideal time, but one never knows. So consequently, depends on whether we have the entire 12 month or we have a portion of that chopped off, would determine the growth. But the momentum is robust.
Okay.
And I'm glad to tell you that the authorities, be it local authorities or central authorities, and the multilateral funding agencies are taking enormous interest to ensure that the cost of infrastructure that we are building stays competitive by arresting the time overrun. I think it's good that the system has recognized the cost overrun as a consequence of time overrun. So if you want to get the cost under control, we'll have to get the time under control. And that is also helping the industry's costs.
Yes, we saw your working capital to sales also move into a very healthy direction. Should you see more of that, since you say that everyone is now conscious of time overruns, more improvements in working capital to sales?
There is a natural cycle to the invoicing and collections. And given the fact that many of the projects are state or central government sponsored projects, there is a lead lag in collecting this money. My sense is that if we are able to operate working capital at about a 16 to 18% band of the revenues, I think we are doing a commendable job. There is always a possibility to keep improving because never say never for any such improvements. But it does look more practical to assume and operate at a 16-17% band rather than look at a 7-8% band.
Okay, fair enough. Let me come to the order book. I mean, you were always expected to better than that 10 to 12%. I mean, by a huge margin. But now you've lately announced a lot of big orders from the Middle, even more big orders from the Middle East. So you don't want to increase that order book guidance? Or even if you can tell me this, do you feel that you will, outperform by an even larger margin than you thought perhaps a couple of months back?
I know when we last spoke end October,
yes,
we did mention that we will outperform the guidance. If you really see, the first 2 months have been relatively quiet of the current quarter as compared to the past 2 months leading up to the end of the previous quarter. There is a certain volatility and fluctuations to this ordering momentum because of the processes involved. It is good that the order inflow is helped by some large orders from Middle East. But if you look at the pipeline of orders that are lined up, I think there is still some more distance to go before we can announce, complete outperformance to the order of magnitude that you possibly are hinting. We will have an opportunity every 90 days to revisit this. So end of this month, as we gather ourselves to see how the last quarter of the year looks, we will have an opportunity to see whether we can be a little more precise than what we are. But I do expect a certain slowdown in the last quarter. Run up to elections have always been indicative of that, because any orders that you give out now, invariably the execution will be carried under the supervision of the next government.
Yes.
Now, how far will the government's the current incumbent government will sort of commit themselves to these programs is to be seen, because we've had history of some of the state governments cancelling projects that have been announced by the earlier governments for no rhyme or reason. And I think it has put a lot of construction industry into a big spin because of the resources that it had committed, etc. So even in the industry, we will possibly be a little cagey and slow of the orders that we win in Q4 before we really go full clip. So I think there is a certain natural headwind that will develop. So I think we'll have to factor for that as well.
I wanted, if you can update us on, the vertical of electrolyzers and green hydrogen. That was the other thing Mr. Subramanian was very excited about. So any update on that and its future in the next 2 years?
Yeah, I think we realize the fact that energy transition is going to be a big play globally, and India cannot be left behind. And consequently, when we looked at the various opportunities for this transition, two things stood out. One is India needs to get more solar generation while waiting for solution for battery
Yeah.
storage, etc. The solar generation needs to be augmented. So we started betting on solar projects. Fortunately for us, international orders also came our way, and since today we are fairly large with almost $6 billion worth of order backlog just in solar EPC projects.
Okay.
Secondly, we also looked at hydrogen as an emerging fuel source for industrial application at least, because we yet do not know the cost competitiveness and the safety factors around its use for individual consumption. But at industrial application, automotive transportation purposes, it did look promising. So we said that we will get into that play by manufacturing electrolyzer, which is a key component for hydrogen generation. Fortunately for us, I think we scouted around and got a technology tie-up with McPhy Energy of France. Today, as we speak, the first electrolyzer is under construction. We are putting that together in our Asira plant. By end of this fiscal, we'll possibly have a prototype, and we could check that for its application, its features, its cost competitiveness, global attractiveness, etc. And if the product marks all this well, we'll possibly experiment it with a couple of hydrogen EPC projects, by which time we hope to get. And then if that does well, we will possibly take it as a global product. So there is an opportunity to scale this electrolyzer manufacturing activity. And we think, being the manufacturing experts that we are in some of these areas, we think we stand a good chance.
Okay.
The other area that actually excited us is putting together as a EPC package
Yes.
for hydrogen manufacturing. Fortunately for us, we struck a transaction with IOCL at an MOU basis. IOCL as well as Renew Power will provide the green power for the electrolyzer manufacturing. We would put up a plant which will generate hydrogen, which will be used for the refinery of IOCL.
Okay.
Depending on how this goes, this can be replicated in the other refineries of IOCL, as well as replicated in other refineries beyond IOCL.
Okay.
So this being, and this is more public sector led at the moment, but I'm sure the private sector, who consume a lot of industrial fuel, would also look at this, provided the solution is cost effective and functionalities meet their requirements.
Okay.
So we are pretty excited about application of this hydrogen through our EPC and electrolyzer manufacturing.
Okay.
Added to this excitement is our recent foray into semiconductors, because that's another area that we have been trying to explore as to what is it that we could do. We realized that our ability to compete with global giants on manufacturing fabs is going to be very limited. So consequently, we shifted our attention to design, and now we have put together a company, and we're in the process of assembling a team which will work on design, 40 nanometers and beyond in terms of the chips.
Okay.
And we will possibly co-create a design along with manufacturers, OEM. And hopefully, if the functionality tests are passed, we would design those chips using the talent pool that India is blessed with on chip designing.
Okay, now that's all the cutting edge areas that one would want the company to be in. Very good to hear. It's not surprising, therefore, that the L&T stock is at all-time highs. You're celebrating along with us. Thank you very much, Mr. Shankar Raman, for this conversation.
Thank you. Hopes precede actual performance. We hope we back it up with performance. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All
Thank you
the
very
way.
much.
CNBC TV18, embarking on a quarter century of excellence.